The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me on this Monday evening. And boy, I'm really excited about what we're going to be talking about tonight. It's something that probably a lot of us have known and maybe have heard of and, just kind of maybe even looked into a little bit over the past, I think, about 53 years now, roughly. And we're talking tonight about D.B. Cooper. And the reason why that I wanted to bring in this subject tonight was a couple months back, we were doing some kind of true crime episode. I don't quite remember which one it was. And someone said to me, "Oh, is that D.B. Cooper?" And they were mistaken. But it was like suddenly like something clicked in my mind. And it was like, oh my gosh, I've forgotten all about D.B. Cooper. I've forgotten all about everything surrounding by that. And although that predates me just a little bit, I always found it very interesting. I think I even saw an episode about it on In Search of back in the late 70s. You know, there's so many interesting theories and whatnot about it. But I was able to find Robert Edwards and his book, D.B. Cooper and Flight 305, Re-examining the Hijacking and Disappearance. And he was very kind enough to join me from Romania and very kind enough to give me some of his time tonight so we can walk through this a little bit. Bob, first of all, welcome to GhostBox Radio. Really appreciate you taking the time today and talking with me.
Greg, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be on your show.
That's very kind. And I think one of the things that we had talked about, which I think is really first of all, the way this book operates and the way that we're going to carry on this conversation tonight. You know, we're going to kind of keep it to the facts. I think there are theories around of who it might have been, the hijacker, and other thoughts on, maybe motive, anything else. Tonight, because the book is this way, because Bob is this way, we're going to keep it to the facts. And I think that that's a great way of looking at it, because there is so much to talk about here that keeping it to the facts makes a lot of sense. And also, Bob had mentioned that, he's going to keep the people that were involved, such as eyewitnesses or law enforcement, to their functions, not by names, because a lot of them are still alive, keeping privacy. Just, it doesn't dilute the story at all. So it's just I think it's just a smart way of going forward. So why don't we kind of get started? And Bob, where, we were kind of talking a little bit beforehand, before we started recording. What was it about D.B. Cooper that, captured your interest to want to write about him?
Well, Greg, I was attracted by the aspect of mystery, first of all. This is, of course, an unsolved mystery, which, as you say, dates now 53 years.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was in England, it was during the pandemic. There was very little to do. We were not able to go out. I was stuck at home. And I was looking for something to, if you like, preserve my sanity.
Yeah.
And I think I had come across D.B. Cooper somewhere on the internet. I'm not sure where, probably Wikipedia. And it caught my attention. the fact that it was unsolved, and it also caught my attention in the sense that I saw there was a great deal of data that seemed to be unexplored. And as I've told you, my background is in mathematics. I like to work with data, and I thought here was an opportunity to add to the debate on a purely factual basis, not to attempt to find the identity of the hijacker of Flight 305, but simply to firm up the course of events during the evening of November 24th, 1971.
I think it's interesting that because the story is there's so much to it, that the identity would actually almost be secondary because there's so many interesting facets to this story. Can you walk us through, for those who do not know, not necessarily who D.B. Cooper was, because we're not talking about that, but I guess what D.B. Cooper was in terms of this whole hijacking event?
Yes, okay. The facts of the event are fairly simply stated, and of course they are available to anybody who wants to look on a search engine and find out the story.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what happened was that on November 24th, 1971, Northwest Airlines boarded from Portland, Oregon, for Seattle, Washington, which is normally a very short flight, about 36 minutes. The last or second last person to board was a man aged between 40 and 50,
Mm-hmm.
Relatively tall, thin man, wearing a dark business suit and apparently a raincoat, carrying a briefcase. And in all other respects, a completely nondescript person, a person whom you would pass in the street and never remember. And yet what happened was that within minutes of pushing back from the gate and starting the takeoff roll, this man, sitting in the far back of the airplane, the last seat at the back,
Mm-hmm.
Row 18, turned to the stewardess who was sitting behind him and gave her a note. And this note has gone down in history. The note read, "Miss, I have a bomb, and I would like you to sit with me." So that's how the hijacking started. And to keep the story short, he asked for $200,000, 4 parachutes, to be ready for him when they arrived in Seattle. And that was done. The plane circled for a long time over Seattle while they were looking for the money and the parachutes, but they got them. They landed. The hijacker allowed all the passengers to deplane, and most of them, in fact, I think all of them, had no idea that the hijacking had taken place.
Oh, wow.
He received the money and the parachutes. He allowed 2 stewardesses to leave, and he kept the 3 flight crew and 1 stewardess and said, "Okay, we are going to Mexico." Again, to keep the story short, they never arrived in Mexico. He asked for the rear stairs of the airplane, and it was a Boeing 727, which had the rear stairs. He asked the stairs to be lowered. He told the stewardess to go to the flight deck, so he was alone in the passenger cabin. Nobody saw him depart. But somewhere during that leg, he departed with the money, with 1 or maybe 2 of the parachutes. No one is really sure. And as history records, he was never seen again.
And I think it's important for younger listeners to understand the situation of airports back in the 70s versus situations of airports today. Obviously, the biggest one being that there are really no cameras anywhere within the airport itself. So the idea of no one knows for sure what he looked like apart from someone giving the description, that's the only way that people know about what he looked like, right? I mean there might have been some kind of a camera system, but nothing like what we have today.
Greg, to the best of my knowledge, there was no camera system whatsoever.
Yeah.
Certainly not in Portland Airport at that time. Furthermore, there was no security control whatsoever.
Yeah.
Any passenger could board an airplane, I believe anywhere in the United States, carrying whatever they liked. It could be a gun, could be a bomb, could be a weapon. There was no ID. Nobody asked for an ID. You could give any name you liked. And as we know, the hijacker gave the name Dan Cooper, which obviously was not his real name.
Mm-hmm.
That name has gone down in history, or infamy, if you like.
Right.
And somehow there's a story attached to that, which is maybe we don't need to go into, but the name Dan Cooper became DB Cooper, and that's the name which stayed.
How did it become DB Cooper? I was curious about that.
Well, okay, I'm not really sure myself, but as
Sure.
I understand, there was some kind of miscommunication between a journalist and probably a law enforcement officer, or possibly somebody from Northwest Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
And the journalist, I think, heard D. Cooper, but he was not quite sure. He asked, was that D. Cooper or B. Cooper? And the person at the other end said, yeah. So the journalist wrote down D.B. Cooper. And the FBI held on to that name
mm-hmm.
for a very good reason, because if anyone was going to come up and confess or finger somebody and say, I know who D.B. Cooper is, they would have, if you like, what they call a tell. How does this person get the name D.B. Cooper, since the name on the ticket was Dan Cooper?
Yeah.
So it was a device for filtering fake or hoax confessions or accusations from real ones. If anyone knew the real hijacker, they would logically say, I know Dan Cooper.
And I can imagine there was a ton of hoaxes, probably, weren't there?
There were, I would think, hundreds, if not thousands, of, if you like, possibly well-intentioned or possibly not, but certainly there were thousands of proposals made by citizens to the FBI over the years, including some which were in fact confessions. There were people confessing to be D.B. Cooper, and there were others who said it was my brother, was my cousin,
right,
it was my buddy in the Navy, it was my late husband, it was me.
Right. And it's still unsolved. No one knows who he is. I find it funny. I just thought about this, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks this, is that those some of those men in suits that are in the Matrix films, they look just like what I always thought the images of DB Cooper kind of looking like, with the sunglasses and the black suit and everything else. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because it's kind of generic. I mean, like you said, and I find that very interesting. The descriptions of him, like you'd pass him in the street, you wouldn't. He doesn't draw attention. He's just an average person, and there's nothing that brings you to be like, oh, well, look out for that one. He's there's something going on there. It's a very average person.
Yeah. Yes, he was a nobody, and perhaps that's what he intended to be. He wanted to be somebody that no one would notice. And there is a little bit of story behind that, arising from one or two witnesses' descriptions, to the effect that this man somehow did not look right in the suit.
Oh.
It looked like he was, if you like, a guy who did not normally wear a suit, but he had bought a suit or acquired a suit and a tie and a white shirt for the occasion in order for people somehow to think he was just a businessman on a trip and not worth anybody's attention.
Right. That's interesting. Gosh. And the thing is, it's very clear that this person was very thorough, very smart about the whole plan. So, like you had mentioned, it's like he probably wanted to look like that he wouldn't stand out. I mean, that was all part of the big plan, would be my guess. I mean, obviously we won't know. We can't talk to him, but it just seemed like everything was a pretty meticulous plan from what it seems like from what we saw.
Yes, Greg, I think that's correct. I think he had a quite detailed plan. And here probably I take issue a little bit with the FBI, who in some quarters of the FBI were inclined to cast him as a dumb crook who got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Which, okay, is one way of looking at him. And for all I know, they might have been right. He might have simply got lucky. But from my perspective, the events do look planned. And if I may, I'll give you some examples of why I think that's the case.
Okay.
Probably the most important single element that stands out is that he chose to fly on a Boeing 727. Now, the Boeing 727 is, or was at that time, one of the few airliners, and by far the most common airliner in the US, and indeed the world, which had this device that they called the ventral air stair. And this is a stair which is integrated into the airplane below the tail and descends to the ground when the airplane is parked, can embark and disembark. There were two other airplanes which had this characteristic. One of them was the Douglas DC-9, which was not that common at the time in the US. And the other was a British airplane called the BAC-111, which had exactly the same feature. And that was very rare in the United States. So he chose a Boeing 727, obviously knowing that it had the ventral air stair, but also it seems that he must have had the knowledge, which was relatively uncommon knowledge, that the air stair could be lowered in flight.
Okay, that's a big deal, right? Obviously.
That is a big deal, and probably an average passenger would not know that.
Right, absolutely.
Secondly, he chose a very short flight, a flight of 36 minutes, which to me tells something to the effect that he wanted it all to be over very quickly. Thirdly, he chose a flight that was terminating. He knew it would stop in Seattle, and therefore everybody who was on the plane would have to get off, except for himself. Again, that's, for me, an element of planning, because if you choose a flight that's going, shall we say, Las Vegas, Portland, Seattle, and you start in Las Vegas, you know there'll be people trying to get on board at the next stop, and they will not be happy to know that they cannot because there's a hijacking underway.
No.
That did not happen.
No, there's a lot of thought there. Do you mind if we do this? I want to, before we go any further, I want to get in a quick break here so that we can continue breaking down these pieces here. We are talking with Bob Edwards. His book is D.B. Cooper in Flight 305, re-examining the hijacking and disappearance. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Greg Bakun here. I love historic tours of Minneapolis and seeing everything it has to offer. But if you know me, I like to include a little spooky in my tours, which is why I found the perfect combination. Minneapolis Trolley Tours does this amazing candlelight ghost tour that you have to check out. It's an extremely immersive experience. It's a trolley trip that starts out at a haunted mansion, traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's After Hours. Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
The Tilted Tiki, located in downtown Stillwater, helps you get your tropical tiki vibe on with a large selection of fantastic tasting tiki cocktails served in unique and fun glasses, a menu of delicious food ranging from small bites, craft tacos, sandwiches, and more. Plus, don't forget they have live music Wednesday through Saturday nights. Located in downtown Stillwater, the Tilted Tiki is your tropical relaxation restaurant in Minnesota. Visit thetiltedtiki.com. Greg Bakun here. I've told you about the out-of-the-world roast beef sandwiches at Maverick's Real Roast Beef, but I haven't told you about their Philly steak sandwiches, turkey bacon avocado sandwich, BLT, crispy chicken, fish sandwiches, brisket, or pulled pork. Okay, you get the idea. They make a lot of delicious food to the same standard as their famous roast beef sandwiches, and now I'm starving. I'm going to go to Maverick's Real Roast Beef off Lexington and Roseville, and you need to go too. Check out their menu at mavericksbeef.com.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with metamorphosisconnections.com. Metamorphosisconnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search metamorphosisconnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on metamorphosisconnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting metamorphosisconnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's metamorphosisconnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
And welcome back to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. We are in a very interesting conversation tonight with Robert Edwards. He is the author of the book D.B. Cooper and Flight 305, Reexamining the Hijacking and Disappearance. It's available on Amazon. Please go and pick it up. I mean, these are great books because it's a kind of an insight into something very historical now, but also I think something that'd be kind of hard to try to replicate today. And we in the last segment we were kind of talking about a little bit about how D.B. Cooper he kind of meticulously planned this. And to your point, I find it very interesting that FBI might have been thinking a little bit more like he got lucky. I just do not see, even before you kind of broke it down for me a little bit, I can't see how that's somebody getting lucky. It seems to be somebody who had knowledge to a certain, either just smart or had knowledge to certain things. And one of them obviously being about aviation and planes and stuff. Is there been, I mean, I'm assuming that there's been a lot of like character makeup on D.B. Cooper over the years. And I mean, how does aviation fit into that?
Well, okay, Greg. We started talking about the elements of planning in this situation. There is indeed more to it, and as you say, it relates to the hijacker's knowledge of aviation. Now, this came into play in the second part of the flight when the airplane had left Seattle and was it on its way south, supposedly to Mexico, although, of course, as we know, they never arrived in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to the departure from Seattle, the hijacker gave some very specific instructions to the flight crew. And one of those instructions was to fly not about 10,000 feet. Now, 10,000 feet is quite a significant altitude, because it's generally recognized, especially if you have been in the armed forces, and if you have done any kind of flying or parachuting, you would know that at 10,000 feet you do not need oxygen. If you go much above 10,000 feet, you will need an oxygen mask. And that's one of the reasons why, if you ever have a depressurization in a modern airplane and the oxygen masks come tumbling down from the ceiling, the pilots will very quickly descend to 10,000 feet as soon as they can. They will make an emergency descent because they know at 10,000 feet you can breathe the air. Evidently, the hijacker knew that. Secondly, he asked for a specific configuration of the airplane. He asked for the landing gear to be lowered and for them to fly at 10,000 feet with the gear down. That is a very unusual configuration. It's very high drag, for one thing. It results in very high fuel consumption. And secondly, he asked for the flaps. For those who don't know what flaps are, they are aerofoil surfaces on the trailing edge of the wings, which are normally lowered for takeoff and for landing. There are usually three settings, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees. Hijacker asked for 15 degrees. He didn't say more than that, but pilots would know that with flaps at 15 degrees, you have what's called a flap limiting speed. At that setting, you cannot fly very much faster than about 150 knots, maybe 155, maybe 160, but that's about it. That is a very safe speed for departing from an airplane. So without naming the airspeed he wanted, he named a configuration such that he would get the airspeed that he wanted for a safe exit from the airplane. So there you see, again, more aspects of the hijacker's aviation knowledge, which certainly would not be the knowledge of a normal passenger.
No, I have a question. That was like having the landing gear down. That was would have been from Seattle to Mexico?
Yes, that's correct. He said, when you depart Seattle, I want you to keep the gear down. And of course, the crew said, well, with gear down, we are never going to make Mexico.
That's what I was wondering. Okay.
With gear down, you're going to burn so much gas, your range will be cut short. But they negotiated with the hijacker and they said, look, could we do Yuma? Could we do San Francisco? Could we do Reno? He said, okay, Reno. You can stop in Reno and refuel. I think we can read between the lines. It did not matter to him. He was going to be gone.
Yeah.
But he said, okay, go to Reno and we'll take it from there.
Do you know if anybody on the crew was thinking that, okay, they see what he's doing, and at least in the extent that he's planning on bailing at some point? Was that ever something that became very obvious to anyone else that was involved during the time it was happening?
Well, of course, his demand for parachutes gave them a message that he planned to bail. But they were not sure whether that was a bluff or an intention. And they were not sure why he asked for 4. There was some debate over that. They suspected that perhaps he asked for 4 in order that, in case the law enforcement should try to tamper with any of them, he would have spares or backups. And secondly, he wanted, I think, to put a doubt in their mind as to whether he would demand for one of the crew to jump with him.
Yeah.
As long as there was that doubt in the minds of law enforcement, you would not want to tamper with any parachute.
No. I mean, once again, that's really smart.
But it was, I think, increasingly clear as the flight from Seattle to Reno progressed that he intended to bail. First of all, having sent the lone stewardess to the flight deck and being then alone in the passenger cabin, the last thing he asked for was instructions on how to put the air stair down. And she gave him those instructions. He said, "Fine, I've got it, now go." She went, she closed the curtain. And within a few minutes on the flight deck, they saw the annunciator light go on, little orange light saying that the air stair was down. Not down and locked, but down. So it seemed to be down in an unstable position, but they knew at that point that the air stair had been opened. And what he was doing, they did not know. There is, of course, it's in the public domain, it's on the FBI vault, transcript. There exist transcripts of most of the communications between the flight crew and air traffic control, and also between the flight crew and Northwest Airlines in Minneapolis. And from those transcripts, you can see that the flight crew was suspecting an imminent bailout. I think they suspected that within about 15 minutes of the departure from Seattle.
And that's clear. And I mean, do you think even for D.B. Cooper to want to go to Seattle, which you explain very well why that makes a lot of sense, do you think that the area surrounding and that flight path with the forest and the woods and stuff, that was also part of that consideration?
The flight path, again, for me as a mathematician, and I may not have mentioned, but I also have a private pilot's license, so I have some familiarity with aviation, general aviation. There was one aspect of the flight path that seemed very interesting to me. The fact that the hijacker demanded a altitude of 10,000 feet, not merely constrained the configuration, his ability to be in an open, exposed cabin with no oxygen, but it also constrained the flight path. Because if you know a little bit about the Pacific Northwest, you know that when you depart Seattle towards Portland and further south, you have mountains on both sides. You have the Cascades to your left or to your port side, which rise up to 14,000 feet. And on your starboard side, your right side, you have the coast Cascades, or I think they call them the Eastern Cascades, which are much lower. They're about 4,000 feet. But at 10,000 feet, you probably have to go between those two ranges. Mm-hmm. You certainly have to stay away from the Cascades, because 10,000 feet, you do not want to, especially in a situation of low visibility and darkness, you do not want to be near the mountains. So in a way, the hijacker was kind of forcing them to fly down the Willamette Valley over Oregon.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful flat valley where you can bail out pretty much anywhere you want. And you will see some illuminations below. You'll see some big cities, well lighted, like Portland, Salem, and Eugene.
Yep.
And they will guide you as to where you are. So there was certainly an element of control in that very, very simple instruction that we're going down the Willamette Valley.
That's me. Now, I remember, and maybe this is something that I made up in my mind. I thought that somebody took a photograph of somebody jumping out of a plane that was that could have been D.B. Cooper, could have been that flight. Is that something I made up in my mind, or was that something that that either existed and was debunked, or what?
Yes, Greg, you made that up.
Did I really? That doesn't exist.
Yes, certainly no photograph was ever taken of the hijacker, neither on the ground nor anywhere in the air, nor leaving the airplane. But of course, there have been reenactments. And there have been book covers showing a person in a business suit departing an airplane.
Yeah.
Which would be either an artist's conception or a reenactment.
That's so interesting.
In fact, there was, for the 50th anniversary of the hijacking, it was in 2021, November 24th exactly, a gentleman whom I know, who dressed up in a business suit and jumped out of an airplane over the Columbia River to celebrate the anniversary. And that's on YouTube. You can look it up.
How very interesting. Boy, talk about memory cheating. I'll have to look to see if I could find what I thought was in my mind just for the sake of looking. All right, Bob, let's go ahead and do this. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the book. I want to talk about maybe more stuff that I pretended in my mind existed. I don't know. But we have a lot more to get through. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Greg Bakun here. I love historic tours of Minneapolis and seeing everything it has to offer. But if you know me, I like to include a little spooky in my tours, which is why I found the perfect combination. Minneapolis Trolley Tours does this amazing candlelight ghost tour that you have to check out. It's an extremely immersive experience. It's a trolley trip that starts out at a haunted mansion, traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's After Hours. Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
The Tilted Tiki, located in downtown Stillwater, helps you get your tropical tiki vibe on with a large selection of fantastic tasting tiki cocktails served in unique and fun glasses, a menu of delicious food ranging from small bites, craft tacos, sandwiches, and more. Plus, don't forget they have live music Wednesday through Saturday nights. Located in downtown Stillwater, the Tilted Tiki is your tropical relaxation restaurant in Minnesota. Visit thetiltedtiki.com. Greg Bakun here. I've told you about the out-of-the-world roast beef sandwiches at Maverick's Real Roast Beef, but I haven't told you about their Philly steak sandwiches, turkey bacon avocado sandwich, BLT, crispy chicken, fish sandwiches, brisket, or pulled pork. Okay, you get the idea. They make a lot of delicious food to the same standard as their famous roast beef sandwiches, and now I'm starving. I'm going to go to Maverick's Real Roast Beef off Lexington and Roseville, and you need to go too. Check out their menu at mavericksbeef.com.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with metamorphosisconnections.com. Metamorphosisconnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search metamorphosisconnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on metamorphosisconnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting metamorphosisconnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's metamorphosisconnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We're going to have on author Catherine Reef. She is going to be on talking about Mary Shelley, who, of course, created Frankenstein. Mary Shelley had such an interesting life, and she had done so much. And being a woman back in the early 1800s, in the 1800s in particular, had been very difficult, and she accomplished so much. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. But we are having our conversation currently with author Robert Edwards. We're talking about his book, D.B. Cooper and Flight 305, Re-examining the Hijacking and Disappearance. And we were talking during break that this is just a little morsel of the overall case, and you really should, if this is something that interests you, and this is very interesting, go over to Amazon, pick up this book. There's a lot going on there, and one of the things that I remember that I do think is real, and you correct me if I'm wrong, with my picture that I seem to have created out of nowhere. I think that was an In Search Of, to be very honest. That there was some money found, wasn't there, of what he had taken?
Yes, Greg, that's correct. In February 1980, on the banks of the Columbia River, on the Washington side, a place called Tina Bar, a small boy about 8 years old who was having a picnic with his parents, was looking for some driftwood on the beach, did a little digging in the sand, and found wads of very deteriorated U.S. currency. Mm-hmm. And when they dug it up, they took it, I think, first to the sheriff, and then I think finally it went to the FBI. They checked the serial numbers on the bills, and every serial number matched serials of the money that had been given to the hijacker of Flight 305 some 8 years previously. That amount was $5,800, or it might have been a little bit more. But that was the first, if you like, new evidence in the case, 8 years after the events.
Wow.
That this money was found. And of course, that generated a hurricane of speculation and theory. And the particular place where the money was found created some real conundrums for the FBI, because it wasn't in a place that made any sense.
It's so interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If you would like me to try and encapsulate why it didn't make any sense.
I'd love to know, because because nothing about this makes sense, really, right? When you think about it. Yes, please do.
Okay, well, for the money to be on the banks of the Columbia at that particular spot made no sense in terms of the flight path, because the flight path had been to the east of that spot by about 15-20 miles. And the prevailing wind in that area is from the west. It's from the Pacific, as it has to be. So how could money, if it had left the plane by any kind of aerodynamic means, how could it travel upwind?
Right.
So right there, you've got money 20 miles upwind of where the airplane was.
Right.
Of course, that generated theories that the flight path was wrong and the airplane had been somewhere else. But I did try in my book to demonstrate that there was really no reason to question the flight path. The airplane was indeed going down a federal corridor, which is known as Victor 23. Mm-hmm. And Victor 23 is an important part of the story. But right there, there's one conundrum. How do you get money to be upwind of the flight path? Okay, the theory which came up immediately was, well, the hijacker buried it there. Now, that was a very difficult hypothesis for anybody to take on board, because why would a hijacker who presumably wants to get out of the scene quite quickly, why would he hike 20 miles to an isolated beach where very few people ever go and bury some portion of his money? What would he hope to achieve?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I think for the time we have, I cannot get into that. But let me just quickly say about the third conundrum, which was that very early on, the FBI had pretty much arrived at a fixed idea that the hijacker had jumped over a very small community called Highland, Washington, which is near the Merwin Dam, and it's near the Lewis River. So a hypothesis arose, well, okay, he jumped somewhere near the Merwin Dam, maybe he even landed in the Merwin Lake, lost some part of the money, and the money then traveled down the Lewis River and reached the Columbia. Wait a minute, where the Lewis River reaches the Columbia, it's downstream of Tina Bar. How can money travel upstream? Even if the money arrived by water, how could it travel upstream some 10 miles to get to Tina Bar? That didn't make sense either.
No.
Well, some weird theories arose, and I have to laugh a little bit because the FBI bought into some of those theories, but let me leave it at that. There were mysteries there that didn't make any sense. How did that money get there? To this day, I think, I have a view, but let's say the FBI never arrived at a satisfactory explanation.
It's very clear that the money was taken by salmon because they go upstream. And no, I'm just kidding. That's a joke.
Just kidding. I hope, Greg.
Right. No, but honestly, it's really something that you have all these pieces that, I'm sorry, we're never going to know, are we? I mean, we're never going to know the true nature of every aspect of this, because it's so long now, and probably anybody who's really a part of it, that like whoever Dan was, that's gone. So when we had talked also about the origins of the name Dan Cooper as well, which is pretty interesting as well.
Okay, well, briefly, Greg, there is one mainstream view about the origin of the name, and then there is my view, which is a different view.
Interesting.
Let me tell you the mainstream view first of all. This is a view which is so mainstream, it's on the website of the FBI. And this relates to a series of comics, or to be accurate, graphic novels, originally produced in Belgium and France in French. And they were a series of graphic novels about a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, who, being Canadian, of course, speaks French. So that's how we can have a French language graphic novel.
Yep.
And the name of this pilot was Dan Cooper. So you got this whole series of graphic novels originating in France and Belgium, never circulated in the United States, but to a very small extent circulated in French Canada. I used to live in Montreal myself, but I never saw these graphic novels in the bookstores. But a hypothesis arose that perhaps the hijacker had been a French Canadian, and somehow had seen French language comics in Montreal. Okay, I personally found that pretty difficult to buy. I mean, how many French Canadians are there in the USA at any one time? I think not very many. My own view, I think, is much simpler. There was in the USA in the 1930s a whole series, dozens of cheap magazines which sold for a nickel, aimed at young boys, 8, 10, 12 years old, full of adventure, full of inspiring adventure for little boys. And one of these comics or magazines was called Bill Barnes' Air Trails. And in every issue, I think it came out every month, there were stories about heroic pilots, soldiers, airmen, parachutists of all kinds. And it was in an issue of, I think, somewhere in the early 30s, in one of the issues of Bill Barnes' Air Trails, there was a story called Canned Death. And that was a story about a brave pilot who normally in his working life, he flies right seat in an airliner, but it's boring. He doesn't much like that job. So he quits the airline and gets a job down in the oil fields in Texas, ferrying stuff around of a dangerous nature like nitroglycerine. That's why they call it Canned Death. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice story. The name of this pilot is Dan Cooper.
Oh, look at that.
For me, it's much more simple to imagine a guy who is, let's say, in his 40s, between 40 and 50 in 1971. In the early 30s, he's about 10 years old.
Yep. With
his nickel, he goes down the store and buys Bill Barnes' Air Trails, reads the story of Dan Cooper, the heroic pilot, and thinks, wow, that name sticks in his mind.
That seems very plausible to me. And we have about 2 minutes left here. And, the one thing, too, is like you mentioned, that the FBI thinks, possibly French-Canadian. Wouldn't there have been an accent of some sort in his speaking? Like, wouldn't that have been something that maybe would have been related to the FBI? So, and to my knowledge, there hadn't been anything like that, right?
That's correct. All the witnesses, and there were essentially the three cabin crew, 5 passengers who felt sufficiently confident to recall the hijacker, even though at the time they had not known he was a hijacker. There were approximately, and plus the ticket agent who sold him the ticket, Portland to Seattle, and also the gate agent who at some point processed his boarding card. There were something like 10 witnesses altogether, and not one of them could detect any kind of accent that would be intelligible to an American ear. That's to say, he did not have any kind of Texan accent, New York accent, Southern accent. Mm-hmm. They essentially said he had no accent. Mm. And I would agree, French Canadians have a very specific accent. So I don't buy that story. I think he was a U.S. citizen, but I do not think he was a Canadian or a French Canadian. I think he was just a regular American person.
And as generic as you can get, quite frankly.
Generic as you can get, a guy you would forget.
God, and that seems, it once again, and to go back to it, and folks, I really do recommend getting the book, because once again, we're just talking a sliver of information on here, but boy, going back to how very much he planned everything. I think, to me, when I'm hearing this, Bob, it just sounds like somebody who has planned literally every aspect of it, even down to the name that he uses. I think there's a meaning behind it. That's pretty impressive, actually.
I think so, Greg. And for me, it makes the hijacker, even though I don't feel I know him, I feel in some sense I have an idea of where he came from. So, and he was, of course, a criminal, and what he did was a crime.
Now, I'm going to need to cut us off right there. Once again, the book is called D.B. Cooper and Flight 305, Reexamining the Hijacking and Disappearance, written by Robert Edwards. Go to Amazon, pick it up. Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Greg.
And we'll be back tomorrow with Catherine Reef. Everyone, take care.